The dog tags were so dirty you could barely read them, hanging around the neck of the homeless man who'd been camping behind Tony's store. When Tony finally cleaned them off after the robbery, what he read made him drop to his knees in shame. Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams, Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Medal of Honor. The worthless vagrant he'd been treating like trash was one of America's most decorated war heroes. And he'd just saved Tony's life. Tony Ricci's convenience store sat on the corner of Main Street and 5th Avenue in Riverside, California. A small city where everyone knew everyone else's business. The store had been in Tony's family for 30 years, passed down from his father who'd immigrated from Italy with nothing but dreams and determination. Tony was proud of his store, proud of serving the community, and absolutely obsessed with keeping his property clean and respectable. Which is why the homeless man sleeping behind his dumpster was driving him absolutely crazy. Marcus Williams had appeared 3 weeks ago, setting up a makeshift camp of cardboard boxes and old blankets in the narrow alley behind Tony's store. He was quiet, clean as someone in his situation could be, and never bothered customers or asked for handouts. But his very presence infuriated Tony, who saw the homeless veteran as a threat to his business and his family's reputation. "This is not a campground," Tony had screamed on the first day, coming out with a baseball bat. "You move along right now or I'm calling the cops." Marcus had looked up from the book he was reading, a battered paperback novel, and simply nodded. "I understand, sir. I'll move on in the morning." But morning came and went, and Marcus was still there. Tony called the police, but Officer Martinez had taken one look at Marcus's dog tags and simply told Tony that as long as the man wasn't breaking any laws, there wasn't much they could do. "He's a veteran," Officer Martinez had said quietly. "Been through some tough times. Maybe show a little compassion." "Compassion doesn't pay my bills," Tony had snapped back. "I got a business to run." For 3 weeks, this dance continued. Tony would threaten, Marcus would apologize and promise to leave, but somehow never quite managed to disappear entirely. The homeless veteran was polite, respectful, and seemed to go out of his way to avoid causing any actual problems. He cleaned up after himself, never left trash around, and even once stopped a group of teenagers from spray painting graffiti on Tony's back wall. But Tony couldn't see past his own frustration and prejudice. All he saw was a problem that wouldn't go away. What Tony didn't know, what nobody in Riverside knew, was that Marcus Williams had once been a legend in the U.S. Army Special Forces. Staff Sergeant Williams had served 4 tours in Afghanistan, leading a specialized unit that conducted some of the most dangerous missions in the War on Terror. Marcus had enlisted at 18, straight out of high school in Detroit, Michigan. His father had been a factory worker, his mother a nurse, and they'd raised him to believe in duty, honor, and service to country. The Army had given him purpose, brothers in arms, and a sense of belonging he'd never experienced before. For 12 years, Marcus had been everything the Army wanted in a soldier. He was brave without being reckless, intelligent without being arrogant, and loyal to his core. His men followed him not because they had to, but because they trusted him completely. He'd saved lives, completed impossible missions, and earned the respect of everyone who served with him. The medals came with the territory. The Purple Heart after he'd been wounded by an IED while rescuing a fellow soldier. The Bronze Star for exceptional courage during a firefight that saved an entire convoy. And finally, the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration, for a mission in the mountains of Afghanistan that officially never happened. That mission had changed everything. Marcus had led his unit into a Taliban stronghold to rescue hostages, fighting against overwhelming odds for 18 hours straight. When it was over, 23 American civilians were safe, but Marcus had lost 3 of his closest friends and carried wounds that went far deeper than the shrapnel in his leg. The PTSD hit him hard after that. Nightmares, flashbacks, survivor's guilt that ate at him like acid. The Army had tried to help, counseling, medication, different assignments, but nothing seemed to work. Marcus felt like he was slowly disappearing inside his own mind, becoming a ghost in his own life. When his enlistment ended, Marcus had tried to adjust to civilian life, but the skills that made him an exceptional soldier, hypervigilance, tactical thinking, the ability to spot threats everywhere, made him a misfit in the regular world. Jobs didn't last. Relationships fell apart. The nightmares got worse. The drinking started as self-medication and became something darker. Marcus lost his apartment, his car, his savings. Friends and family tried to help, but Marcus was too proud and too broken to accept charity. Eventually, he just started walking, moving from city to city, carrying everything he owned in a backpack and sleeping wherever he could find shelter. But even at his lowest point, Marcus never sold his dog tags. They were the only proof left that he'd once been someone who mattered, someone who'd made a difference. He kept them around his neck, hidden beneath whatever clothes he could find, a secret reminder of the man he used to be. November 15th started like any other night. Tony closed his store at 10 p.m., counted the register, and prepared to head home to his wife and 2 kids. Business had been slow lately. The big chain stores were killing small operators like him, but he was hanging on, one day at a time. As he locked up, Tony noticed Marcus settling into his usual spot behind the dumpster. The sight filled him with the familiar surge of irritation and anger. "I told you 100 times," Tony shouted across the alley. "You can't stay here." Marcus looked up, his face gaunt but his eyes alert. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ricci. I'll move on tomorrow. You said that yesterday and the day before." "I'm sick of your lies." Tony stormed back into his store, grabbed a garden hose, and came back out. Without warning, he turned the cold water on Marcus, soaking the homeless veteran and his meager possessions. "There. Maybe now you'll get the message." Marcus didn't fight back, didn't curse, didn't even stand up. He just sat there, water dripping from his long hair and beard, looking at Tony with an expression that was part sadness, part understanding. "I understand, sir," Marcus said quietly. "I'll do my best to find somewhere else." Something in his tone made Tony pause. For just a moment, he saw not a vagrant, but a human being, someone who'd fallen on hard times and was trying to maintain his dignity despite being treated like garbage. But the moment passed, and Tony's anger reasserted itself. "You better!" Tony snapped, then got in his car and drove home. What Tony didn't see was Marcus quietly wringing out his wet clothes and settling back down for another cold night. What he also didn't see was the black sedan that had been watching the store for the past 3 days, or the 3 men inside it who'd been casing the place for a robbery. At 11:47 p.m., just as Tony was settling into bed 30 miles away, the robbery began. The 3 men who entered Tony's convenience store were professionals. They'd done this before, hitting small family-owned businesses that didn't have sophisticated security systems or rapid police response. The leader, a man named Carlos Vega, had served time for armed robbery and knew exactly how to disable alarm systems and avoid cameras. They'd been watching Tony's routine for weeks. They knew he left alone every night, knew about the safe in the back office, knew the store would be empty and vulnerable. What they didn't know was that Marcus Williams was sleeping just outside the back door. The alarm was disabled within seconds. The 3 men spread out through the store, moving with practiced efficiency. Vega headed for the office, while his 2 partners, Danny Cruz and Mike Torres, began emptying the register and grabbing cartons of cigarettes, high-value items that were easy to fence. They'd done this exact same job dozens of times before. They expected to be in and out within 10 minutes, long before any security company or police could respond. It should have been easy money. That's when everything went wrong. Marcus had been dozing fitfully when the sound of the alarm system being disabled woke him. Most people wouldn't have noticed the subtle electronic beep, but 12 years of military training had given Marcus ears that could detect the smallest anomaly. He was instantly alert, his mind automatically cataloging sounds and assessing threats. Through the thin back wall of the store, he could hear voices, 3 men, moving carefully, speaking in the clipped tones of people conducting a criminal operation. Marcus had heard that tone before, in raids on Taliban compounds, and he recognized it immediately. His first instinct was to stay hidden. This wasn't his store, wasn't his problem. Tony Ricci had made it very clear that Marcus wasn't welcome here. The smart thing to do was keep his head down and wait for the robbers to leave, but then Marcus heard something that changed everything. "Check the back office," Vega's voice carried clearly through the wall. "And if anyone shows up, we handle them permanent. Like, no witnesses." The casual way Vega talked about murder flipped a switch in Marcus's brain. Suddenly, he wasn't a homeless veteran hiding behind a dumpster. He was Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams, Special Forces, and he had never allowed civilians to be harmed on his watch. Marcus moved to the back door of the store, his body automatically falling into the tactical posture that had kept him alive through 4 tours of combat. His hands found the knob, unlocked, just as he'd expected. Tony always forgot to secure the back entrance. Very carefully, Marcus eased the door open and slipped inside. Inside the store, the 3 robbers were concentrating on their work. Vega was in the office, trying to crack the safe. Cruz was at the register, and Torres was loading cigarettes into duffel bags. None of them were paying attention to the back of the store. That was their first mistake. Marcus moved through the storage area like a ghost, his bare feet silent on the concrete floor. Years of Special Forces training had taught him how to navigate hostile territory without being detected, and despite everything he'd lost, those skills remained sharp. He could see the tactical situation clearly. 3 armed men, standard robbery formation, focused on their objectives rather than security. The leader was isolated in the office. Take him out first to disrupt command and control. The other 2 were in the main store area, but separated enough that Marcus could engage them individually if he moved fast enough. The only weapons available were whatever he could find in the storage room. Marcus's eyes fell on a crowbar that Tony used for opening delivery crates. It wasn't much, but Marcus had learned to make do with whatever was available. He was just about to move when he heard the front door chime. Tony Ricci pushed through the front door of his store, muttering under his breath about the alarm system. The security company had called him at home, reporting a possible malfunction, and Tony had driven all the way back to check on things. He expected to find a false alarm, maybe a loose wire or a power fluctuation. Instead, he found Danny Cruz pointing a gun at his face. "Well, well," Cruz said with a nasty smile. "Look what we got here." The owner came back to visit. Tony's hands shot up instinctively, his mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. Not to him, not in his store. "Please," he stammered. "Take whatever you want. I won't call the police." "Oh, I know you won't," Cruz replied. "Because dead men don't make phone calls." From the office, Vega's voice called out, "What's going on out there?" "Boss, we got the owner. What you want me to do with him?" There was a pause. Then Vega's voice again. "You know what to do. Make it clean." Tony's blood turned to ice. He was about to die, gunned down in his own store by men who saw his life as nothing more than a loose end to tie up. He thought of his wife, his kids, his parents who'd worked so hard to build this business. That's when the lights went out. Marcus had used the distraction of Tony's arrival to cut the main power line in the storage room. The store plunged into darkness. And in that darkness, 12 years of Special Forces training took over completely. Cruz spun around, trying to figure out what had happened, his gun waving wildly in the black air. That moment of confusion was all Marcus needed. He struck from behind, the crowbar connecting with Cruz's wrist with surgical precision. The gun clattered to the floor as Cruz screamed in pain from his shattered bones. Before Cruz could recover, Marcus wrapped an arm around his throat in a sleeper hold that cut off blood flow to the brain. In seconds, the robber was unconscious on the floor. Danny, what's happening out there?" Vega's voice was sharp with alarm. Marcus was already moving toward the office, using the layout he'd memorized during his weeks behind the store. Torres was stumbling around in the dark, trying to find his partner, his own weapon drawn but useless, without a target. Marcus came up behind him like death itself. A precise strike to the base of Torres's skull dropped him instantly. 2 down, 1 to go. In the office, Vega had figured out that they were under attack. He came out shooting, muzzle flashes lighting up the store in strobing glimpses. But Marcus wasn't where Vega expected him to be. The homeless veteran had already flanked around, using the store's aisles for cover, moving with the fluid precision of someone who'd done this in much more dangerous places. When Marcus struck, it was with overwhelming force and speed. The crowbar caught Vega's gun hand, sending the weapon flying. A follow-up strike to the solar plexus doubled the robber over, gasping for breath. A final blow to the back of the neck put him down for good. The entire fight had lasted less than 60 seconds. In the sudden silence that followed, Tony Ricci found himself standing in his dark store, surrounded by 3 unconscious criminals, staring at the homeless man he'd been trying to get rid of for weeks. "Are you hurt, sir?" Marcus asked, his voice calm and professional. Tony couldn't speak, couldn't process what had just happened. This man, this vagrant he'd hosed down just hours earlier, had just saved his life with a display of combat skills that seemed impossible. Marcus walked to the electrical panel and restored power. In the sudden brightness, Tony got his first clear look at the man who'd rescued him. Marcus was thin from malnutrition. His clothes were still damp from the hosing. His hair and beard were unkempt, but his eyes held a clarity and strength that Tony was only now beginning to see. "We should call the police," Marcus said, already zip-tying the unconscious robbers with supplies from Tony's storage room. "These men will need medical attention, but they'll live." The police arrived within minutes, responding to the automatic alarm that had been triggered when the power was restored. Officer Martinez was the first through the door, and his eyes immediately found Marcus. "Mr. Williams," Martinez said with obvious respect. "I should have known." Tony stared at this exchange, confused. "You know him?" "Know him?" Martinez replied. "Mr. Ricci, this man is a legend. Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams, Medal of Honor recipient. He saved more lives than most people ever dream of." Tony felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Medal of Honor?" Marcus looked uncomfortable with the attention. "It's not important," he said quietly. "Not important?" Martinez shook his head. "Sir, you're one of the most decorated soldiers in the history of the U.S. Army. Every cop in this county knows your story." As the paramedics treated the injured robbers and crime scene techs processed evidence, Martinez told Tony the story he'd never bothered to learn. About Marcus's service record, his heroism in Afghanistan, the mission that had earned him the nation's highest honor, about the PTSD that had cost him everything, and the downward spiral that had led him to the streets. "He never talks about it," Martinez said. "Never asks for special treatment. Just tries to get by without bothering anyone." Tony felt sick. For 3 weeks, he'd been abusing and humiliating a man who'd risked his life for his country, who'd saved countless lives, who'd earned honors that most people could only dream of. And tonight, that same man had saved Tony's life without hesitation, despite everything Tony had done to him. As the scene wound down and the robbers were taken away, Tony found himself alone with Marcus in the store. The homeless veteran was preparing to leave, gathering his few possessions from the alley. "Wait," Tony called out. "Your dog tags. Can I see them?" Marcus hesitated, then pulled the chain from beneath his shirt. The tags were indeed dirty, tarnished from years of exposure, but Tony could make out the name and service information. More importantly, he could see the small Medal of Honor pin that Marcus had attached to the chain, the only outward sign of his extraordinary service. Tony took the tags in his hands and read them carefully. "Williams, Marcus J. Staff Sergeant, U.S. Army Special Forces." When he looked up, his eyes were filled with tears. "I'm sorry," Tony whispered. "I'm so sorry." What happened next would become legendary in Riverside, California. Tony Ricci, the stubborn store owner who'd spent 3 weeks trying to get rid of a homeless veteran, dropped to his knees in front of Marcus Williams and began to sob. "I didn't know," Tony said through his tears. "I didn't know who you were, what you'd done, what you'd sacrificed." Marcus reached down and gently helped Tony to his feet. "You don't owe me anything, Mr. Ricci. I was just doing what anyone would do." "No," Tony said firmly. "No, that's not true. You saved my life. You saved my family, and I treated you like garbage." The transformation in Tony was immediate and complete. The man who'd hosed down a homeless veteran just hours earlier now saw Marcus for who he truly was. A hero who'd fallen on hard times, a warrior who'd given everything for his country and gotten very little in return. "You're not sleeping behind my store anymore," Tony declared. Marcus nodded sadly. "I understand. I'll move on." "No," Tony said quickly. "You're not sleeping behind my store because you're going to be sleeping in the apartment upstairs. It's not much, but it's warm and dry. And it's yours for as long as you want it." Marcus stared at him in shock. "Mr. Ricci, I can't accept." "And you're going to work for me?" Tony continued. "Full-time, with benefits. I need someone I can trust to watch the store, and after tonight, I know there's nobody I'd trust more than you." The story of what happened at Tony's convenience store spread quickly through Riverside. Within days, everyone in town knew about the homeless veteran who'd single-handedly stopped an armed robbery. and about the store owner who'd had his eyes opened to the true meaning of heroism. Marcus moved into the small apartment above the store, his first real home in years. Tony gave him an advance on his salary so he could buy new clothes, get a haircut, and begin the process of rebuilding his life. More importantly, Tony gave him something he'd been missing for years: respect and dignity. The job was perfect for Marcus. His military training made him naturally suited for security work, and his calm, professional demeanor impressed customers. Many of them were veterans themselves, and they recognized something in Marcus that commanded respect. Word of Marcus's story reached the local VA hospital, and for the first time in years, he began receiving proper treatment for his PTSD. The combination of stable housing, meaningful work, and professional counseling began to heal wounds that had been festering for years. Tony, meanwhile, became Marcus's biggest advocate. He told everyone who would listen about the decorated war hero working in his store, about the debt of gratitude he owed to a man he'd almost driven away through ignorance and prejudice. "I thought I was protecting my business," Tony would say. "Turns out, I needed protection, and the man I was trying to get rid of was the only one who could provide it." The transformation of both men's lives created ripples that spread far beyond Riverside. Marcus's story was picked up by local media, then national news outlets. Americans across the country were moved by the tale of the decorated veteran who'd been living on the streets, invisible and forgotten, until a moment of crisis revealed his true character. Donations poured in from around the country: money, job offers, letters of support from veterans and civilians alike. Marcus was overwhelmed by the response, but he used the attention to advocate for other homeless veterans who were still struggling in silence. "I was lucky," Marcus would tell reporters. "I had Tony Ricci, who was willing to admit his mistake and make it right. But there are thousands of veterans out there who don't have that chance. They serve their country with honor, and they deserve better than sleeping behind dumpsters." Tony's store became a gathering place for local veterans, a place where they could find understanding and support. Tony hired 2 more veterans as part-time employees, and he established a fund to help homeless vets in the area get back on their feet. The 3 robbers who'd attacked the store received lengthy prison sentences. During their trials, they learned about Marcus's military record and the man they'd tried to victimize. Carlos Vega, the leader, reportedly said that if he'd known who he was dealing with, he never would have targeted Tony's store. "We thought we were hitting an easy target," Vega told police. "Turns out we picked a fight with a one-man army." 6 months after the robbery, Marcus Williams was invited to speak at a Veterans Day ceremony in Los Angeles. He stood before thousands of people, wearing a new suit that Tony had insisted on buying for him, and told his story with quiet dignity. "I want to thank Tony Ricci," Marcus said near the end of his speech, "not just for giving me a job and a home, but for showing me that it's never too late for redemption. Not just mine, but his too." We both learned something important that night: that heroism isn't about the uniform you wear or the medals on your chest. It's about standing up when standing up is needed, regardless of the consequences. In the audience, Tony wiped tears from his eyes as he listened to the man he'd once tried to drive away with a garden hose speak about forgiveness and second chances. After the ceremony, Marcus was approached by a representative from the Medal of Honor Foundation, who invited him to become a spokesperson for veterans' issues. It was a chance to turn his personal struggle into something that could help others, and Marcus accepted without hesitation. Tony's business, meanwhile, had never been better. The publicity from Marcus's story had brought customers from all over California. People who wanted to meet the store owner who'd given a homeless veteran a second chance. But more than that, Tony had gained something invaluable: a deeper understanding of the true meaning of service and sacrifice. 2 years after that November night, Tony's convenience store looked much the same from the outside, but inside, everything had changed. Marcus Williams worked behind the counter with quiet efficiency, his military bearing now complemented by the confidence that came from having found his place in the world again. Regular customers knew his story and treated him with the respect he'd always deserved. Children would stare in awe when their parents told them about the war hero who worked at the corner store. Veterans would stop by just to shake his hand and share their own stories. Tony had framed Marcus's Medal of Honor citation and hung it behind the counter, along with newspaper clippings about the robbery and their subsequent friendship. It served as a reminder to everyone who entered the store that heroes walk among us, often unrecognized and unappreciated. Late one evening, as they were closing the store together, Tony noticed Marcus reading the same battered paperback novel he'd been reading that first night behind the dumpster. "You never did finish that book," Tony observed. Marcus smiled. "I was waiting for the right ending. Did you find it?" Marcus looked around the store. His store now, in many ways. And then at Tony, the man who'd become not just his employer, but his closest friend. "Yeah," Marcus said quietly. "I think I finally found the ending I was looking for." Today, Marcus Williams still works at Tony's convenience store, but he's also become a national advocate for homeless veterans. His story has been featured in documentaries, books, and countless news articles. He speaks regularly at military bases, VA hospitals, and community events, sharing his message of hope and redemption. Tony Ricci has become one of California's most prominent supporters of veterans' causes. His store serves as a model for other businesses looking to hire veterans, and he's helped establish similar programs across the state. The apartment above the store is still Marcus's home, but now it's also the headquarters of the Williams Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping homeless veterans transition back into civilian life. They've housed and employed hundreds of veterans, proving that with the right support, anyone can rebuild their life. The three robbers are still in prison, but they've all written letters to Marcus expressing their remorse and asking for his forgiveness. True to his character, Marcus has forgiven them and even advocated for prison reform programs that help criminals reintegrate into society. Every November 15th, Tony and Marcus mark the anniversary of the night that changed both their lives. They close the store early and have dinner together, talking about how far they've both come and the lessons they've learned. "You saved my life that night," Tony always says. "And you saved mine," Marcus always replies. Both men know it's true. Marcus saved Tony from armed robbers, but Tony saved Marcus from something even more dangerous: invisibility, hopelessness, and the slow death of being forgotten by the society he'd served so faithfully. Their story serves as a reminder that heroism comes in many forms, that redemption is always possible, and that sometimes the person you're most tempted to ignore might be exactly the person you need most. In a world that often seems short on second chances, Tony Ricci and Marcus Williams prove that it's never too late to do the right thing, and that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with compassion, understanding, and the courage to admit when you're wrong. This story is dedicated to all homeless veterans who continue to serve their communities despite being failed by the system they once protected, and to those who choose to see the hero behind the hardship